I am Helena Montez, 35 years old, and I stand at the edge of the glass tower where the city prints its breath on the horizon. A senior bank executive who has learned to turn fear into leverage, ambition into a quiet plan. And I tell this story not for glory, but to lay out the moment when love tried to bend the rules and I learned to bend them back. My hidden ambition has always been to build a fortress of fairness inside a world that loves to bend the line. To show that power can be a shield for the vulnerable and a blade for the deceitful. And I have chased that goal with a patience that feels like steel, slowly cooling into a perfect edge. The personal relationship that frames this episode began with a vow whispered in a crowded room of family and friends. A smile too easy and a hand that could hold a room full of people, as if he could hold me too. A man who promised partnership and a life lived side by side with respect and shared fire. Not the quiet hunger to climb higher while leaving me to carry the weight. We married with the sense that we could weather anything, that the city itself would bow to our combined will, and for years I believed him when he told me I could have it all if I kept my eyes on the prize and my heart in its proper place, until I learned that the prize he wanted most was the power to pull the strings I thought were mine to pull. The setup grows heavy as I remember the morning I first saw the minor tremor in his laugh. The way his eyes flicked toward a document I had not yet signed. The way the room suddenly felt crowded with whispers, even when only two people stood between us. I was a woman who had learned to translate the language of ledgers into persons, to read intent in the tremor of a hand that would sign a deadline into a future. And I had trusted him to stand with me in the trenches I had fought to reach the top of the hill. My role at the bank had grown into a bastion of reliability, a place where men looked to me for the calm calculation that could prevent a fall. Yet behind that calm lay a secret hunger to prove that I could steer not just a department, but the entire fleet of a city's finances toward a better tomorrow. My ambition has always pressed at the seams of propriety, asking what would happen if I refused to shrink to fit the image of a wife who was enough to be loved but never enough to lead. And the test came in a single week, when a storm of chatter traveled through the brass and marble of the building because the man I stood beside carried a map of my career in his pocket. A map that did not include confronting his own vulnerabilities or sharing the spotlight with a wife who could carve a path through the hardest metal. The trigger for the turning of the page was a simple, brutal truth I could not ignore. He wanted a life that did not require him to defer to anyone, a life built on a private economy where his name rose whenever I spoke. And I wanted a life where our names rose together in a chorus of achievements that belonged to both of us. The day I found the first trace of his duplicity, the day the scent of cigar smoke clung to a chair in a hotel corridor that I knew he had not earned the right to occupy, I understood that the personal had become political, that a betrayal of heart could become a betrayal of the very enterprise I was building with my hands and mind. I did not race into accusation. I did not pull the panic lever. I gathered the facts with the same care I used to review a quarterly forecast and watched as the pattern formed, a thread that connected his secret dinners, the late-night calls, the way he always introduced me as my wife when he meant my equal, and the way he allowed whispers to act as if they were truth. I chose to wait and watch, to collect the proof, to stack the reasons in a neat pile that refused to topple under a single gust of gossip. The moment arrived when the boardroom lights burned the same way they do when a storm is about to break, and I realized I had been handed a single unspoken choice: stay and let the house of cards crumble around me, or take the cards into my own hands and deal a hand that could not be challenged. I wanted him to see what I could do without him, to feel the weight of a truth that had grown heavier with every silent concession I had made to keep our life intact. So I staged a reckoning not in a whisper, but in a room where every glass and chair had watched enough secrets to last a lifetime. The plan was to present the evidence that would reveal his duplicity, to lay bare the conflicts of interest and the hand he had in a private venture that needed to stay hidden, if only to protect the fragile reputations of those who believed in me. And I knew that the moment I brought it forward, the scales would tilt away from pity and toward justice, not victory. Because justice to me is not the triumph of vengeance, but the quiet restoration of balance after a long fall. On the day of the confrontation, I wore a suit that did not shout but settled around me like a second skin. The kind of clothes that say, you mean business, and you will not bend to anyone's notion of what you should be. And I walked into the boardroom with a calm that felt almost ceremonial, as if I stood at the head of a council that had waited for the moment when truth would finally take its seat at the table. He stood there too, swagger tempered by fear, the kind of fear that looks like arrogance until you peer closer and notice the tremor in the lip, the way the eyes search for a hole to crawl through. The way a man who has built his life on clever futures suddenly discovers the price of a single misstep. I did not shout. I did not rage. I did not need to, for I carried mumps of quiet knowledge in my pocket and a file thicker than any forecast I had ever written. I began by showing the numbers that proved the conflict of interest, the transfers that should have been disclosed, the misallocated funds that his name had touched in the shadows, and I watched the room react as if a cold wind had swept through, every jaw tightening, every breath held, as if the air itself could betray us both. I spoke of trust and transparency, not as abstract ideals, but as the currency by which a real enterprise survives storms, and I named every cost I would bear to protect those who had believed in us, including the cost of my own reputation if I allowed the wrong person to stand unchallenged. Then I did something no one expected. I said that our marriage had to be dissolved, that the personal tie that had once fueled my ascent must now be severed so cleanly that no rumor could harvest bitterness from the soil we left behind. The words hung between us like a verdict, and I watched him realize that my love had become a tool for justice, not a leash to pull him forward. The revelations did not arrive like a single flash of lightning, but as a careful cascade, each drop falling into place until the whole picture stood before the board. A mosaic of choices and consequences that could not be undone by denial. The room grew quiet, not with fear, but with the weight of truth finally settling where it belonged. And in that hush, I saw the moment when his posture withered, when the line between his ambition and his shame became a map he could not follow to safety. I did not gloat, though I felt the first true sting of justice curling in my chest, a cold satisfaction that any part of me had earned. I offered him the choice to step down with dignity, to withdraw from the enterprise he had tried to weaponize, to respect a future I would still shape without him. He chose the path that many men choose when confronted with a wall of numbers and witnesses. He apologized not for wrongs done, but for the optics of his failure, and I let the room decide whether to grant him mercy or to replace him with the vision we both claimed to share. The decision went to the side of the future, and as the votes shifted and the clock clicked toward a new dawn, I did what was necessary to protect the institution and the people who depended on it. I announced the divorce in precise terms, not as a spectacle, but as a legal and strategic recalibration, a lifeline to those who trusted us, and I stepped into the floor where power takes a breath and found my own.